Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Kellen gripped the steering wheel as he turned onto Maple Street. The familiar cracked sidewalks and faded house numbers of Meadow Ridge, Illinois stretched before him like a timeline he'd rather forget. 6-year-old Joni sat in her booster seat behind him, her small hands pressed against the window. "Is that where you grew up, Dad?" she asked, pointing at a 2-story house with peeling blue paint. "Yes." Kellen's voice stayed level. "That's where Grandma and Grandpa live." 3 months of phone calls had led to this moment. His mother Dolores had called every week, her voice sweet as corn syrup, promising things had changed. Calvin was calmer now, she'd said. They wanted to know their granddaughter. Family was important. Kellen had listened to each call with the patience of a man who'd learned to read between lines. But Joni deserved the chance to know her grandparents. Even if he suspected this visit would end exactly as he expected, he parked in the gravel driveway. The house looked smaller than he remembered, its white trim now gray with age. A rusted wind chime hung silent on the front porch. "Remember what we talked about," Kellen said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "If anyone makes you uncomfortable, you tell me right away." Joni nodded solemnly. At 6, she possessed an unusual awareness of adult behavior that both impressed and worried him. Dolores burst through the front door before they reached the porch steps. Her gray hair was perfectly curled, her floral dress pressed and bright. The performance had already begun. "Oh my goodness, look at this beautiful girl." She swooped down toward Joni with arms outstretched. "I'm your Grandma Dolores, sweetheart. We've been waiting so long to meet you." Joni stepped closer to Kellen's leg, but managed a small smile. "Hi." Calvin appeared in the doorway, his work clothes replaced by a clean button-down shirt. His thick hands hung at his sides as he studied Joni with the same calculating look Kellen remembered from childhood. "She's got the Rourke eyes," Calvin said. "Smart-looking kid. Come in, come in." Dolores ushered them through the front door. "Rena and the girls are already here. They're so excited to meet their cousin." The living room hadn't changed. Same brown carpet, same faded photographs on the mantel, same suffocating smell of air freshener trying to mask something deeper. Rena sat on the couch, her auburn hair styled in loose waves, wearing jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Well, Rena said, standing with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The prodigal son returns. Her daughters, Paisley and Greer, lounged on the floor playing with their phones. They looked up briefly when Joni entered, their expressions ranging from bored to dismissive. "Girls, say hello to your cousin," Rena prompted. "Hi," Paisley mumbled without looking up. Greer said nothing. Kellen felt Joni's grip tighten on his hand. He squeezed back gently. "Joni, these are your cousins," Dolores said with forced cheer. "Paisley is 12 and Greer is 10. They love to play games." "What kind of games?" Joni asked quietly. Paisley snorted. "Not baby games." "Paisley," Rena said with no real authority in her voice. Kellen guided Joni to a chair near the window. "We can't stay long," he said to the room. "I have a meeting back in Chicago this evening." "Oh, surely you can stay for dinner," Dolores said. "I made pot roast, just like when you were little." "We'll see." Calvin lowered himself into his recliner with a grunt. "You look good, son. Success suits you." The word son hit Kellen's ears like static. "Thank you. Must be nice having all that money," Rena said, settling back onto the couch. "Some of us are still struggling down here in the real world." Kellen said nothing. Joni swung her legs from the chair, taking in the adults' conversation with careful attention. "Now, Rena," Dolores said quickly, "Kellen worked hard for what he has." "I'm sure he did." Rena's smile turned sharp. While the rest of us dealt with family obligations, the old pattern was already emerging. Rena's passive-aggressive needling, Dolores' attempts to manage the conversation, Calvin's silent judgment from his throne. Kellen had walked into this house expecting exactly this dynamic, and they were delivering it right on schedule. "Joni, sweetheart," Dolores said, turning her attention away from the brewing tension. "Would you like to help Grandma in the kitchen? I was just about to start the dishes from lunch." Joni looked at Kellen. He nodded once. Okay, she said, sliding down from the chair. That's my good girl, Dolores beamed. Come on, let's go make ourselves useful. As they disappeared into the kitchen, Rena leaned forward on the couch. So how long has it been since you visited? 2 years? 3? Something like that. You know, it would have been nice to have help when Dad had his back surgery last year. Calvin shifted in his chair. I didn't need help. Of course not, Rena said. But some family support would have been appreciated. Kellen watched her carefully. The same manipulation tactics, just updated for a new audience. Rena had always been skilled at weaponizing guilt, turning herself into the perpetual victim of other people's choices. I sent a card, he said simply. A card. Rena laughed, but the sound held no humor. Well, I suppose that's something. From the kitchen came the sound of running water and cheerful chatter. Dolores was in full grandmother mode, probably overwhelming Joni with questions about school and friends and favorite colors. The kid seems well behaved, Calvin said. You raising her right? The casual assumption that Calvin's idea of raising right was something to aspire to send a familiar coldness through Kellen's chest. She's a good kid. Takes discipline, Calvin continued. Kids these days, they don't get enough structure. Too much coddling. Paisley and Greer continued to ignore the adult conversation, lost in their separate digital worlds. The irony wasn't lost on Kellen. Structure is important, he agreed, his voice neutral. Damn right it is. You turn out fine because I didn't let you get away with anything. Soft parenting creates soft kids. The kitchen sound had changed. Dolores's voice was sharper now, though Kellen couldn't make out the words. Then he heard something that made his blood freeze. Wash the dishes properly, you useless little girl. The words cut through the house like a blade. Paisley and Greer looked up from their phones, sudden grins spreading across their faces. Kellen was moving before conscious thought kicked in. 3 steps to the kitchen doorway, and he could see everything. Joni stood at the sink, her small hand submerged in soapy water, tears streaming down her face. A ceramic plate lay broken on the counter. Dolores loomed over her, face red with anger. Look what you've done. You can't even wash a simple dish without breaking something. Paisley and Greer had followed him to the doorway, their laughter barely contained. She's crying like a baby, Greer whispered. Totally pathetic, Paisley agreed. Kellen stepped into the kitchen. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Joni, he said quietly, go wait in the car. His daughter looked up at him with relief flooding her eyes. She dried her hands on the dish towel and hurried past him without a word. Kellen walked to the sink, picked up the dish towel, and placed it carefully on the counter. When he turned to face his mother, his expression was perfectly calm. Consider this visit your last. Dolores's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Kellen, I was just trying to teach her. No. The single word carried the weight of 39 years of accumulated understanding. Kellen looked at each person in the room, his mother's shocked face, Rena's defensive posture in the doorway, Paisley and Greer's confused expressions, Calvin's scowl from the living room. He said nothing else. There was nothing else to say. Kellen walked through the living room, past Calvin's chair, past Rena's stammered protests, and out the front door. The fresh air hit his lungs like salvation. Joni sat in the passenger seat of his car, buckled in and staring straight ahead. Her cheeks were still damp. Dad, she said as he started the engine. Yeah, I don't want to come back here. You won't have to. They drove in silence for the first 10 miles. Kellen's phone buzzed with incoming calls, but he ignored them. In the rearview mirror, Meadow Ridge disappeared behind them like a mirage. Did I do something wrong? Joni asked finally. No, you did nothing wrong. Grandma said I was useless. Kellen's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Grandma was wrong. Why did she say it then? The question every abused child asks. Why did they hurt me if I didn't deserve it? Kellen had spent decades learning the answer, and now he had to find a way to explain it to a 6-year-old. Some people, he said carefully, don't know how to be kind. It's not about you. It's about something broken inside them. Joni considered this. Like when kids are mean at school. Exactly like that. But grown-ups should know better. Will you tell them they hurt my feelings? Kellen glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Her expression was serious, hopeful. She still believed in the possibility of apologies, of people admitting their mistakes and trying to do better. "I don't think they would listen," he said honestly. "Why not?" "Because they don't think they did anything wrong." Joni absorbed this information with the gravity of someone much older. "That's sad." "Yes, it is." His phone buzzed again and again. By the time they reached the Chicago city limits, he had 14 missed calls from his mother and 6 from Rena. He deleted them all without listening to the voicemails. That night, after Joni was safely asleep in her own bed, Kellen sat in his study and stared out at the city lights. The visit had gone exactly as he'd expected, but seeing his daughter's face in that kitchen had crystallized something he'd been avoiding for years. His family hadn't changed. They never would change. And he was done pretending that hope was the same thing as wisdom. 3 days later, Kellen sat across from Louise Garrison at their usual coffee shop in downtown Chicago. The morning rush had thinned out, leaving them relative privacy in a corner booth overlooking Michigan Avenue. Louise stirred his coffee and waited. He'd known Kellen for 8 years, long enough to recognize when his friend was working through something significant. The story about the Meadow Ridge visit had taken exactly 4 minutes to tell, but Louise could see the calculations running behind Kellen's calm exterior. "So what's your next move?" Louise asked. Kellen pulled out his phone and opened his banking app. After a few taps, he turned the screen toward Louise. "See that automatic transfer? It goes out on the 15th of every month." Louise squinted at the numbers. "That's a mortgage payment. My parents' mortgage payment. I've been covering it for 6 years through a trust." "Jesus, Kellen. That's..." Louise did quick math in his head. "That's got to be over $100,000. $137,400. The precision of the number told Louise that Kellen had been tracking every penny. "Why didn't you ever mention this?" "Because I didn't do it for them. I did it for Joni, in case things ever got bad enough that she needed somewhere safe to go. I wanted to make sure they had stability." Louis set down his coffee cup. "But now I know that house will never be safe for her." Kellen's fingers moved across his phone screen with practiced efficiency. "The trust was set up so I could revoke it at any time. All it takes is an email to my financial advisor. And then what happens? They get 3 months of mortgage payments from their own account if they have the money, which they don't." Louise had worked in cybersecurity long enough to appreciate elegant solutions to complex problems. "How do you know they don't have the money?" "Because my mother called me 4 times last week asking for help with their electric bill. But they don't know you've been paying the mortgage. They think the payments are coming from some settlement Calvin got from his old job. My mother mentions it sometimes how lucky they were that his back injury worked out financially." Louise leaned back in the booth. "You've been their safety net for 6 years, and they have no idea." "Correct. And now you're removing the net." "I'm removing my support for people who just taught my 6-year-old daughter that she's worthless." The matter-of-fact tone didn't hide the anger underneath. Louise had seen Kellen handle business rivals and hostile negotiations, but this was different. This was personal in a way that made Louise slightly uncomfortable. "What's the timeline?" Louise asked. "The email goes out today. The trust dissolves within 48 hours. Their February payment will be the last one I cover. So they'll get foreclosure notices in late May, early June, depending on how backed up the county court system is." Louise pulled out his own phone and opened his calendar. "That's about 3 months." "Exactly. And you're going to let them figure it out on their own?" Kellen's expression didn't change. "They're adults. They'll manage. Or they won't. That's their choice." Louise watched his friend carefully. In their years of friendship, he'd learned to read Kellen's different types of silence. This wasn't the contemplative quiet of someone wrestling with a difficult decision. This was the settled calm of someone who'd already worked through every angle and reached a conclusion. "You know they'll call you," Louise said, "when the notices start coming." "Probably. And you'll tell them?" "Nothing. I'll tell them nothing. That's going to be hard. Your mother especially, she'll be confused, scared." Kellen looked out the window at the pedestrians hurrying past on the sidewalk below. She was scared when she screamed at a 6-year-old for breaking a dish. Didn't stop her then. Louise had met Joni several times over the years. She was a remarkable kid, thoughtful, curious, remarkably well-adjusted considering she was being raised by a single father who worked 80-hour weeks. The idea of someone berating her was genuinely disturbing. Okay, Louise said finally. But what's the end game? You cut off their mortgage, they lose the house, and then what? Then they deal with the consequences of their choices. But what does that accomplish, besides making them homeless? Kellen's attention returned to Louise with laser focus. It removes their ability to hurt my daughter. They can't hurt her if you don't visit. As long as they live in that house, Joni will ask about her grandparents. She'll want to know why we don't see them. She'll create stories in her head about what they're like, what she's missing. And if they don't have the house, then the story becomes simple. Grandma and Grandpa made bad choices and lost their home. No mystery, no room for fantasy. Louise considered this logic. It was harsh, but it had a certain brutal clarity. You've really thought this through. I've had 6 years to think it through. But you hope you'd never have to use it. I hope they prove me wrong. Kellen's voice carried the faintest trace of something that might have been disappointment. They didn't. Louise stirred his coffee again, buying time to process what he was hearing. This is a big move, man. Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. I don't want to go back. But your mother, your father, they raised you. Whatever happened between you, there's history there. Yes, there is history. The tone made Louise drop the subject. He'd heard hints over the years about Kellen's childhood, enough to know it hadn't been pleasant. But Kellen guarded those details carefully, sharing them only when absolutely necessary. You want my help with anything? Louise asked. Not yet, but I might need your technical skills later. For what? Documentation. If things get complicated, I want to make sure I have clean records of everything. Louise nodded. Just let me know. Kellen pulled out his wallet and left $20 on the table for 2 cups of coffee. I should get going. Joni has a piano lesson at 3. How is she? After the visit, she's fine. Kids are resilient. And you? Kellen stood and buttoned his coat. I'm exactly where I need to be. After Louise left, Kellen remained in the booth for another 10 minutes. His phone sat on the table in front of him, the banking app still open to the trust management screen. One email would set everything in motion. He thought about Joni's tears in that kitchen, the casual cruelty in his mother's voice, the delighted laughter from his nieces as they watched their cousin suffer. Kellen typed the email to his financial advisor with the same calm efficiency he brought to every business decision. The subject line read, Trust dissolution, urgent. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The response came back within an hour. Dissolution paperwork filed. Trust will be closed by end of business tomorrow. Please confirm you want to proceed. Kellen confirmed. That evening, he helped Joni with her homework at the kitchen table. She was working on a writing assignment about families, illustrating her story with careful crayon drawings. Dad, she said, looking up from her paper. Do you miss your mom and dad? The question caught him off guard. Why do you ask? Because you seemed sad when we left their house. Kellen considered how to answer. I miss the mom and dad I wished I had. But I don't miss the ones I actually had. What's the difference? The ones I wished I had would have been kind to you. Joni nodded seriously and returned to her drawing. She was illustrating a house with 2 figures in the window, herself and Kellen. No grandparents in sight. 3 weeks later, the foreclosure process would begin. But that night, Kellen felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of a plan set in motion. 2 months after the trust dissolution, Kellen was reviewing quarterly reports in his office when his phone began buzzing. The caller ID showed his mother's number. He let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, it buzzed again. Same number. He declined the call. WY lunchtime. She had called 8 times. Kellen finally listened to the first voicemail. Kellen, honey, something terrible has happened. We got this notice from the bank about foreclosure, but there must be some mistake. Your father's settlement money has been paying the mortgage just fine. Can you call me back? I'm so confused and scared. The voice sounded genuinely panicked. Dolores had always been a skilled actress, but this seemed different. Raw, unfiltered. Kellen deleted the message and opened his laptop. The county courthouse had an online database for legal filings. He searched for his parents' address and found what he was looking for. A notice of default filed 3 days ago, right on schedule. His phone buzzed with a text from Rena. Did you know Mom and Dad are getting foreclosed on? Why didn't anyone tell me about this? Kellen set the phone aside and returned to his reports. The quarterly numbers were good. His company had landed 2 new contracts with Fortune 500 clients, and their cybersecurity platform was gaining recognition in the industry. He'd built something solid, something that couldn't be taken away by other people's dysfunction. Over the next week, the calls continued. Dolores left increasingly frantic messages. Calvin called once, leaving a gruff voicemail about bank errors and getting to the bottom of this. Rena sent a series of texts that escalated from confused questions to passive-aggressive accusations. Kellen ignored them all. Then the social media post started. Luis forwarded him screenshots from Rena's profile. When banks target elderly people with predatory lending, where's the justice? My parents are being threatened with foreclosure over what can only be clerical errors. Praying for resolution. The post had dozens of sympathetic comments from Meadow Ridge residents. People Kellen remembered from high school offering prayers and support. Someone had started a crowdfunding page. Kellen studied the screenshots with professional interest. Rena was playing the victim angle perfectly, painting his parents as innocent seniors being abused by corporate greed. The narrative was compelling, and the community was rallying around it. What none of them knew was that the mortgage payments had stopped because Kellen had stopped making them. He opened a new email and attached the screenshots along with a brief note. Prepare for a quiet acquisition. The recipient was Cleo Ford, his real estate attorney. If anyone could navigate this situation cleanly, it was Cleo. Cleo called him back within 2 hours. I've reviewed the property records, she said without preamble. Clean title. No liens except the primary mortgage. Property value is approximately $400,000. Outstanding loan balance is around $320,000. How long until auction? Assuming they don't catch up on payments, probably 3 to 4 months. The bank will try to work with them first, but if they can't prove income, they can't. My father's on disability. My mother has never worked. Then it'll go to sheriff's sale. I can have a shell company ready to bid. Do it. There's something else you should know. Your sister posted that crowdfunding link. They've raised about $3,000 so far. Kellen wasn't surprised. Will that be enough? Not even close. They need at least $20,000 to get current, and that's just for the back payments. Doesn't solve the ongoing payment problem. Good. Kellen. Cleo's voice carried a note of caution. I need to ask this directly. Do your parents know you've been paying their mortgage? No. And you're planning to buy their house out from under them at auction? Yes. That's legally sound, but it's going to create some serious family drama. The family drama already exists. I'm just making it visible. Cleo was quiet for a moment. All right, I'll set up the LLC and prepare for the acquisition. You want your name attached to this at all? Not until it's over. Understood. I'll keep you updated on the timeline. After the call, Kellen found himself thinking about the last conversation he'd had with his mother before the Meadow Ridge visit. She called to confirm the time they should expect him and Joni. I'm so excited, honey, she'd said. Your father has been practicing being gentle with children. We've both been working on ourselves. The memory felt distant now, like something from someone else's life. He'd wanted to believe her then, had allowed himself a sliver of hope that age might have softened their sharp edges. Instead, they'd proven exactly who they were within 15 minutes. His computer chimed with a new email notification. The subject line read, From Pastor Winchell Hodge, urgent family matter. Kellen stared at the email for several minutes before opening it. Pastor Hodge had been a family friend for decades, the man who'd officiated his parents' wedding and baptized both Kellen and Rena. Dear Kellen, the message began. I hope this finds you well. I've been made aware of the difficult situation your parents are facing with their home. I know there have been challenges between you over the years, but family is sacred. Perhaps this is an opportunity for healing and forgiveness. Your mother is deeply distressed, and I believe a word from you could provide comfort during this trial. Would you be willing to meet for coffee when you're next in town? Grace and peace, Pastor Hodge. Kellen read the email twice, then forwarded it to himself and deleted the original. Pastor Hodge meant well, but he was operating from the same flawed assumption that had trapped Kellen for decades, that family relationships were inherently valuable, regardless of their actual content. That evening, he picked up Joni from her after-school program and they drove home through the city traffic. She chattered about her day, a spelling test she'd aced, and a playground dispute she'd helped resolve between two classmates. Madison and Emma were fighting about who got to use the swings first, she explained. So I told them they could take turns, and I would time them. 5 minutes each. That was smart problem solving. It worked. They're friends again now. Kellen glanced at her in the rearview mirror. At 6, she was already demonstrating more emotional intelligence and conflict resolution skills than most adults he knew. The contrast with his own family was striking. "Dad," Joni said as they pulled into their parking garage, "when do I get to see Grandma and Grandpa again?" The question he'd been expecting. "You don't." "Why not?" "Because they weren't kind to you." "But maybe they'll say sorry." "Maybe. But saying sorry and meaning sorry are different things." Joni considered this as they rode the elevator to their floor. How do you know if someone means it? They change their behavior. Sorry is something you show, not just something you say. Have they shown you sorry before? No. Then they probably won't this time either. Probably not. It was a harsh lesson for a 6-year-old, but Kellen had learned long ago that protecting children from reality didn't prepare them for life. It just left them vulnerable when reality inevitably arrived. That night, after Joni was asleep, Kellen received a call from an unknown number with a Meadow Ridge area code. He let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. It was Calvin, his voice rougher than usual. "Son, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but your mother is beside herself with worry. We need to talk. Man to man. Call me back." The message carried the same tone Calvin had used when Kellen was 12 and had broken a window with a baseball. Authority mixed with barely contained anger. The promise of consequences if compliance wasn't immediate. Kellen deleted the voicemail and turned off his phone. 3 days later, Cleo called with an update. The bank filed for summary judgment. Your parents have 30 days to respond or catch up on payments. After that, it goes to share of sale. Any response from the crowdfunding? They're up to about 8,000 now. Still nowhere near enough. And the LLC, established and funded, will be ready to bid when the time comes. Good. Kellen, there's something else. I did some research on the property history. Your parents bought that house in 1987 for $63,000. Even accounting for improvements, they should have significant equity. Meaning they could sell it themselves, pay off the mortgage, and walk away with a decent amount of cash. But only if they act soon. Will they? Based on the social media posts, I don't think they understand that's an option. Your sister keeps talking about fighting the foreclosure rather than exploring alternatives. Kellen wasn't surprised. His family had always chosen drama over pragmatism, victimhood over responsibility. They would exhaust every avenue for blame and sympathy before considering practical solutions. "Let me know when the sale date is set," he said. "Will do." That weekend, Joni had a sleepover at her friend Emma's house. Kellen found himself alone in his apartment for the first time in weeks, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city outside his windows. He opened his laptop and, for the first time since deleting them, allowed himself to wonder about the voicemails from his mother. Not enough to actually listen to them, but enough to acknowledge that somewhere beneath his strategic calculations, the scared child he'd once been was still asking why his parents couldn't love him the way he needed. The answer he'd learned over decades of therapy and hard-won wisdom was that they simply didn't have the capacity. It wasn't about his worthiness or their intentions. It was about fundamental incompatibility between what he needed and what they could provide. Understanding that didn't make it hurt less, but it did make the path forward clearer. Be why Monday morning, the plan was in motion and there was no turning back. Pastor Winchell Hodge stood at Kellen's office reception desk on a Tuesday morning in early June, his weathered hands clutching a worn leather Bible. The receptionist looked uncertain. This clearly wasn't a typical business appointment. "Sir, Mr. Rourke is in meetings all morning," she explained for the second time. "I'll wait," Pastor Hodge said quietly. "As long as it takes." Through his office's glass wall, Kellen could see the old man settling into one of the waiting area chairs. 75 years old, gray hair thinning but still neatly combed, wearing the same style of Navy suit he'd worn to church services for the past 3 decades. Kellen finished his conference call and walked out to the reception area. "Pastor Hodge." "Hello, Kellen." The pastor stood slowly, arthritis evident in his movements. Thank you for seeing me. I wasn't aware I had a choice. There's always a choice, son. That's what I came to talk about. Kellen gestured toward his office. 5 minutes. Pastor Hodge followed him inside and took the chair across from Kellen's desk. For a moment, neither man spoke. The pastor's eyes took in the sleek office decor, the awards on the walls, the view of Lake Michigan through the floor-to-ceiling windows. You've done well for yourself, Pastor Hodge said finally. Thank you. Your parents are proud of you, you know, despite everything. Kellen's expression didn't change. Is that why you're here? To tell me about their pride? I'm here because your mother is in pain. Real pain, Kellen. She's confused and frightened, and she needs her son. She needed to not scream at my daughter. She failed. Pastor Hodge leaned forward slightly. People make mistakes. Even good people. Your mother loves you, and she loves Joni. No, my mother loves the idea of being a grandmother. She loves the social status that comes with having a successful son. She doesn't love actual people. That's a harsh judgment. It's an accurate one. Pastor Hodge reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small photograph. Your mother gave me this to show you. It's from when you were Joni's age. Kellen glanced at the photo without taking it. A 6-year-old boy with dark hair and serious eyes, standing next to a much younger Dolores in their backyard. Both were smiling. I remember that day, Kellen said. She was happy because my father was out of town and couldn't ruin whatever game we were playing. She was happy because she was with her son. She was happy because there was no one around to criticize her parenting or tell her she was doing it wrong. Pastor Hodge set the photograph on the desk between them. You were loved, Kellen. Maybe not perfectly, but you were loved. Love isn't a feeling, Pastor. It's a behavior. And their behavior toward me, toward each other, toward my daughter, that's not love. Forgiveness isn't about excusing behavior. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of anger. Kellen leaned back in his chair. I'm not angry. No, anger would imply I expected something different. I expect them to be exactly who they are. Pastor Hodge studied Kellen's face, looking for cracks in the calm exterior. Then why the foreclosure? Why are you letting them lose their home? I'm not letting them do anything. I stopped enabling their dysfunction. By removing support they didn't know they had. By removing support they never earned. They're your parents, Kellen. Honor thy father and mother. Honor is earned. Kellen's voice carried a slight edge now. You can't demand respect through biology alone. Pastor Hodge was quiet for a moment, clearly recalibrating his approach. What would it take? For you to help them? A time machine. I'm serious. So, am I. Kellen pulled out his phone and opened a video he'd been saving for this conversation. I'm going to show you something, Pastor. And after you watch it, I want you to tell me again about forgiveness and family obligations. He turned the phone screen toward Pastor Hodge and pressed play. The video was grainy, but the audio was clear. Joni's small voice, trembling with confusion as she tried to wash dishes. Dolores's harsh words cutting through the kitchen. Wash the dishes properly, you useless little girl. The sound of Paisley and Greer laughing in the background. Pastor Hodge watched in silence, his face growing pale. That's my 6-year-old daughter, Kellen said when the video ended. Being called useless by her grandmother while her cousins laugh at her tears. Pastor Hodge's hands shook slightly as he handed the phone back. I didn't know. Now you do. But surely, this was an isolated incident. People have bad days. This wasn't a bad day. This was Tuesday afternoon in the Rourke household. This is who they are when they think no one important is watching. Have you shown them this video? Explain how it made you feel. They were there. They know what happened. But perhaps they don't understand the impact. Pastor, Kellen's voice was flat, final. Would you want your granddaughter in that room? Pastor Hodge opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Would you tell your daughter to bring her child back to visit people who called her useless? Would you encourage forgiveness for adults who thought it was funny to watch a 6-year-old cry? Pastor Hodge stared at the photograph on the desk. No, he said quietly. I wouldn't. Then we understand each other. Pastor Hodge stood slowly, leaving the photograph where it lay. What about their souls, Kellen? What about redemption? Redemption requires recognition of wrongdoing. They don't think they did anything wrong. How do you know? Because not one of them has apologized. Not to me, not to Joni. They're too busy playing victim to acknowledge the actual victim. Pastor Hodge reached the office door, then turned back. And if they did apologize, if they acknowledged their mistakes, then they'd be different people than they are. But if they did, Kellen considered the hypothetical question. If my parents became the kind of people who could genuinely apologize for harming a child, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. The foreclosure wouldn't be happening. So there's hope. There's always hope, Pastor. But hope isn't a strategy. And I won't sacrifice my daughter's well-being on the altar of my family's potential for growth. Pastor Hodge nodded slowly and left without another word. After he was gone, Kellen picked up the photograph from his desk. The 6-year-old boy in the picture looked happy, innocent, unaware of the decades of disappointment ahead of him. He placed the photo in his desk drawer next to the business cards and forgotten paperwork. Some memories belonged in the past. Cleo Ford's heels clicked against the courthouse steps as she climbed toward the sheriff's sale. It was a humid Thursday morning in late July, and a small crowd had gathered for the auction. Most were investors or house flippers looking for deals. A few appeared to be neighbors, drawn by curiosity or concern. Kellen sat in his car across the street, watching through tinted windows. He could see his mother near the courthouse entrance, her face drawn and pale. Rena stood beside her, animated and angry, gesturing toward the auctioneer. A local news reporter was setting up nearby, probably alerted by Rena's social media campaign. Midwest Property Holdings, LLC, represented by Ms. Ford, the auctioneer called out. Opening bid $40,000. A murmur went through the small crowd. The opening bid was well below market value, but that was typical for foreclosure auctions. Do I hear 50? The auctioneer continued. Silence. Kellen had done his research. The house needed significant work: new roof, updated electrical, foundation repairs that Calvin had been ignoring for years. Most investors would factor in those costs before bidding. Going once at $40,000, the auctioneer announced. 50, a voice called out from the crowd. Kellen recognized him, Dave Morrison, a local contractor who'd been buying distressed properties for decades. This was exactly what Kellen had expected. 60,000, Cleo said clearly. Dave Morrison glanced in her direction, sizing up the competition. Professional investor versus out-of-town attorney. He nodded slightly and raised his hand. 70. 80. Cleo countered without hesitation. The pattern continued for several minutes. Dave would bid. Cleo would immediately counter. By the time they reached 120,000, Dave was starting to look frustrated. 130, he called out, but his voice carried less confidence. 140, Cleo responded instantly. Dave looked around the crowd, perhaps hoping for support or guidance. But foreclosure auctions weren't community decisions. They were business transactions. 150, he said, but it sounded more like a question than a bid. 175, Cleo said. Dave Morrison stepped back from the auctioneer and shook his head. The house wasn't worth getting into a bidding war over, especially against someone who seemed to have unlimited resources. Going once at 175, the auctioneer announced. Going twice. Sold to Midwest Property Holdings. Cleo walked up to complete the paperwork. From across the street, Kellen could see Dolores covering her face with her hands. Rena was already pulling out her phone, probably to post about corporate vultures preying on innocent families. 20 minutes later, Cleo slid into the passenger seat of Kellen's car. Well, that was efficient. Any complications? None. Clean sale, clear title. I'll file the eviction notice this afternoon. Timeline, 30 days. They can contest it, but they won't have grounds. We own the property now. Kellen started the engine and pulled away from the courthouse. In his rearview mirror, he could see the reporter interviewing his mother and sister. Dolores looked shell-shocked. Rena looked furious. Your sister's already posted about this on social media, Cleo said, checking her phone. Something about corporate predators stealing family homes. Let me guess. She's setting up another crowdfunding page. Actually, yes. Help the Rourke family fight illegal eviction. Kellen wasn't surprised. Rena had always been skilled at turning personal failures into public campaigns for sympathy and support. She doesn't understand that the eviction is completely legal, Cleo continued. New owner, new rules. Standard procedure. Will anyone donate to her crowdfunding? Probably. People love an underdog story, but it won't matter. The legal process is already in motion. They drove in silence for several miles. Kellen felt neither satisfaction nor regret, just the calm that came with seeing a plan executed successfully. There's something else, Cleo said as they reached the Chicago city limits. I did some additional research on your parents' financial situation, and they could have avoided this entirely. Even after missing several mortgage payments, the bank would have worked with them on a payment plan or a loan modification. They never even tried. Why not? Best I can tell, they were too busy looking for someone else to blame to explore solutions. Kellen nodded. It fit the pattern perfectly. His family had always been more invested in being victims than in solving problems. What's next? Cleo asked. Next, they have 30 days to move out. After that, we take possession, and then I decide what to do with a house I never wanted to own. That evening, Kellen picked up Joni from summer camp. She was sunburned and exhausted, full of stories about arts and craft projects and capture the flag games. Dad, can Emma come over for dinner tomorrow? She asked as they walked to the car. If her parents say yes, they will. Her mom likes you. Why's that? Because you don't yell. The casual observation hit him harder than it should have. At 6 years old, Joni had already learned to evaluate adults based on their emotional regulation. She developed survival skills he'd hoped she'd never need. Do all parents yell? She asked as they drove home. No, good parents don't yell. What about when kids do something really bad? Good parents find other ways to teach lessons. Joni absorbed this information seriously. Like what? Like explaining why the behavior was wrong, taking away privileges, making sure kids understand the consequences of their choices. But not yelling. Not yelling. That's good, she said, settling back in her seat. Yelling is scary. That night, after Joni was asleep, Kellen received a call from Louise. I saw the news coverage, Louise said without preamble. Your sister's really going all out with the victim narrative. I expected that. She's claiming the buyer was specifically targeting your family. Says it's suspicious that some LLC swooped in with unlimited funds. Suspicion isn't evidence. True, but she's getting traction on social media. The story's being shared pretty widely. Kellen was quiet for a moment. Will it matter? Legally? No. Cleo covered all the bases. But in terms of public perception, I don't live in Meadow Ridge anymore. Public perception, there isn't my concern. Fair enough. I just wanted you to know what you're dealing with. I appreciate it. After the call, Kellen spent an hour reading through the social media posts Louise had forwarded him. Rena had crafted a compelling narrative. Elderly parents victimized by corporate greed, family homes stolen by mysterious investors, community rallying to fight injustice. The story had everything people loved: clear villains, sympathetic victims, and the David versus Goliath dynamic that made for viral content. What the story didn't include was any mention of a 6-year-old girl being called useless, or 39 years of emotional abuse, or the fact that the mysterious investor was paying consequences for behavior his family had chosen. But that was fine. Kellen had never expected his family to tell the truth about themselves. He just finally stopped expecting him to protect them from the consequences of their lies. 2 weeks later, Cleo called with an update. They've hired a lawyer, she said. Someone from Meadow Ridge who specializes in tenant rights. Can they stop the eviction? No, but they can make it take longer and cost more. How much longer? Maybe another month, if they file the right motions. And cost? A few thousand in legal fees. Nothing significant. Kellen found himself oddly impressed. For the first time in their lives, his parents were actually fighting for something instead of just complaining about it. It was too late to save their house, but at least they were trying. Let them fight, he said, as long as the outcome doesn't change. It won't, but be prepared for more media attention. Their lawyer seems to think public pressure might help their case. Will it? This is a legal matter, not a popularity contest. The court doesn't care how many people feel sorry for them. That night, Kellen explained the situation to Joni in age-appropriate terms. Grandma and Grandpa have to move out of their house, he said. Why? Because they couldn't pay for it anymore. Where will they go? Somewhere else. Somewhere they can afford. Joni considered this pragmatic explanation. Will they be okay? They're adults. They'll figure it out. Do you feel sad about it? Kellen thought about the question carefully. No. I feel like something that needed to happen is finally happening. That's good, right? Yes. That's good. The eviction hearing took place on a sweltering Tuesday morning in August. Kellen sat in the back of the Meadow Ridge County courtroom, wearing a simple black suit and observing the proceedings with detached interest. His parents sat at the defendant's table with their attorney, James Crawford, a soft-spoken man in his 60s who'd probably handled more tenant disputes than he cared to count. Dolores wore her best dress, the navy blue one she'd reserved for church and special occasions. Calvin sat rigid in an ill-fitting suit, his work-roughened hands folded tightly in his lap. Rena occupied the first row of the gallery, flanked by Paisley and Greer. Several neighbors and church members filled the remaining seats, along with the same reporter who'd covered the sheriff's sale. Judge Patricia Hendricks, a stern woman in her 50s, reviewed the case file with practiced efficiency. This was routine business for her: another foreclosure, another eviction, another family learning that good intentions don't pay mortgages. Mr. Crawford, Judge Hendricks said, your clients are contesting this eviction on what grounds? Crawford stood slowly. Your Honor, my clients believe this eviction is retaliatory in nature. The new property owner specifically targeted their home for acquisition, and the timeline suggests this was a coordinated effort to displace an elderly couple. Do you have evidence of retaliation? We have evidence of suspicious circumstances, Your Honor. The winning bidder at the sheriff's sale was represented by an out-of-state attorney with unlimited resources. They outbid all local investors with what appears to be the sole purpose of acquiring this specific property. Judge Hendricks looked unimpressed. Mr. Crawford, sheriff sales are public auctions. Anyone can bid. The fact that your clients don't like who won doesn't constitute grounds for overturning a legal sale. Your Honor, if we could. Furthermore, Judge Hendricks continued, your client's financial difficulties preceded the sale by several months. The foreclosure process was initiated because they failed to make mortgage payments, not because someone wanted to buy their house. Cleo Ford sat at the plaintiff's table, saying nothing. Her presence was almost unnecessary. The law was clear, the paperwork was clean, and the defense had no legal foundation for their arguments. Crawford tried a different approach. Your Honor, my clients are prepared to pay all back rent and costs if the court would grant them additional time to secure financing. From what source? Judge Hendricks interrupted. According to the financial affidavits you filed, your clients have no income beyond Social Security and disability payments. How exactly do they propose to pay several months of back rent plus ongoing costs? Crawford glanced back at Rena, who nodded encouragingly. Community support, Your Honor. There's been significant local fundraising efforts. Has this community support resulted in actual funds being placed in escrow? Not yet, Your Honor, but then it's not relevant to this proceeding. Kellen watched his mother's face as the judge spoke. Dolores seemed to be realizing, perhaps for the first time, that good intentions and community sympathy wouldn't override legal realities. Mr. Crawford, Judge Hendricks said with growing impatience, do your clients have any legal basis for contesting this eviction? Not emotional, not circumstantial legal. Crawford looked at his notes, then at his clients, then back at the judge. No, Your Honor. Then this hearing is concluded. Eviction is granted. Defendants have 7 days to vacate the premises. The gavel came down with finality. In the gallery, Rena stood up immediately. This is wrong, she called out. You're letting corporate vultures destroy families. Ma'am, Judge Hendricks said sternly, you will maintain order in my courtroom or be removed. These people stole our family home. Bailiff. 2 uniformed officers approached Rena, who allowed herself to be escorted from the courtroom while continuing to voice her objections. Paisley and Greer followed, more embarrassed than supportive. Calvin helped Dolores to her feet. She moved slowly, as if the weight of reality was finally settling on her shoulders. They spoke briefly with Crawford, signed some papers, and shuffled toward the exit. Kellen remained in his seat until the courtroom had mostly emptied. Judge Hendricks was already reviewing the next case file, ready to move on to other people's problems. Outside the courthouse, Kellen found his parents standing by their old pickup truck. Calvin was loading a briefcase into the cab, while Dolores sat on the passenger side, staring at nothing. Kellen approached slowly. This was the closest he'd been to them since the visit that started everything. "Hello, Dad." Calvin looked up, his expression cycling through surprise, anger, and something that might have been resignation. "Son, Mom." Dolores turned toward him with eyes that seemed much older than they'd been 3 months earlier. "Kellen." For a moment, none of them spoke. The courthouse steps buzzed with activity around them, other families dealing with their own legal dramas, attorneys hurrying to the next hearing, reporters looking for stories. "Did you know?" Dolores asked quietly. "About the house?" Kellen studied her face. She looked genuinely confused, as if the connection between cause and effect remained unclear to her. "Did I know what? That they were going to take it. That we were going to lose everything. I knew you couldn't afford the mortgage payments. But the settlement money. There was no settlement money, Mom." Calvin's head snapped up. "What the hell are you talking about? The payments you thought were coming from Dad's back injury settlement. They weren't." Dolores's face went pale. "Then where?" "I was paying your mortgage. For 6 years." The words hung in the humid air like a confession. Calvin's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You," he said. "You were. I was making sure you had stability, in case Joni ever needed somewhere safe to stay. And you stopped," Dolores said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "I stopped. What?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Kellen pulled out his phone and showed them the same video he'd shared with Pastor Hodge. Because of this, they watched in silence. Kellen could see the moment Dolores recognized her own voice calling Joni useless. Calvin's jaw tightened as he heard his granddaughters laughing at their cousin's tears. When the video ended, Dolores was crying. "I was having a bad day. I was stressed about money. And when she broke the plate, she's 6 years old. I know, but she's 6 years old, and you called her useless. In front of children who thought it was funny." Calvin stepped forward, his face red with anger. "Now you listen here, boy." "No." Kellen's voice carried a calm authority that stopped Calvin mid-sentence. "I'm done listening. I'm done hoping. I'm done pretending this family is something it isn't. We're your family," Dolores said through her tears. "No matter what happened, we're your family. Family is what you do, not what you are. And what you did was hurt my daughter. It was one moment," she pleaded. "One bad moment in 39 years. It was the moment that mattered." Calvin's anger seemed to deflate, replaced by something harder to define. "So that's it? You're going to let us lose everything because of one mistake? I'm going to stop enabling your mistakes. There's a difference. Where are we supposed to go?" Dolores asked. "We don't have anywhere to go. You'll figure it out. You're adults." "Kellen, please." 7 days, he said, walking toward his car. "The judge gave you 7 days. This is what you wanted, isn't it?" Dolores called after him, her voice breaking. "To destroy your own family?" Kellen stopped and turned back to face them one last time. "No, I just stopped funding my abuser's lifestyle." He got in his car and drove away, leaving them standing by their pickup truck with 7 days to pack 37 years of accumulated life. That evening, he picked up Joni from Emma's house. The 2 girls had spent the afternoon making friendship bracelets and planning a camping trip in Joni's backyard. "Did you have a good day, Dad?" Joni asked as they drove home. "I did. How about you?" "Emma's mom made us grilled cheese with tomato soup. And we watched a movie about a princess who saves herself." "That sounds like a good movie." "It was. The princess didn't need anyone to rescue her because she was smart and brave." Kellen glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Those are good qualities to have. Do you think I'm smart and brave?" "I think you're one of the smartest, bravest people I know." Joni smiled at this assessment. "Good. Because Emma's mom said smart and brave girls can do anything they want when they grow up. Emma's mom is right." That night, after Joni was asleep, Kellen stood on his balcony overlooking Lake Michigan. The city lights reflected off the water like scattered stars, and the summer air carried the distant sound of traffic and conversation from the streets below. His phone buzzed with a text from Luis. Saw the news coverage. How do you feel? Kellen typed back. Like something that needed to happen finally happened. Any regrets? No. Good. You protected your kid. That's what matters. Kellen pocketed the phone and remained on the balcony for another hour, watching the lake and thinking about the future. In 7 days, his parents would be homeless. In a month, he would own the house where he'd grown up. And somewhere in the space between those facts lay the difference between justice and revenge, that he'd chosen justice. It felt exactly like he'd thought it would, not satisfying, not painful, just necessary. 6 weeks after the eviction, Kellen stood in the empty rooms of his childhood home, watching the demolition crew pack up their equipment. The walls that had witnessed decades of dysfunction were gone. The kitchen where Joni had been humiliated was a pile of debris in a dumpster. The house had been reduced to its foundation in 3 days. Clean slate, said Mike Torres, the demolition foreman, wiping sweat from his forehead. Whatever you're planning to build here is going to be a hell of a lot better than what was here before. Kellen walked through the space where the living room used to be, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. That's the plan. He'd spent weeks researching nonprofit organizations focused on childhood trauma and domestic abuse recovery. The final choice had been easy. Haven House, a Chicago-based organization that specialized in providing safe spaces and counseling services for children who'd experienced family violence. Their director, Dr. Sarah Martinez, had been cautiously optimistic when Kellen first approached her about the land donation. This would allow us to establish our first satellite location, she'd explained during their initial meeting. Meadow Ridge has a significant need for these services, but no local resources. What would you build? Kellen had asked. A residential facility for children in crisis situations. Short-term housing, counseling offices, educational support spaces. A place where kids can be safe while we work with families or find alternative placements. It was exactly what Kellen had hoped to hear. Now, 2 months later, the groundbreaking ceremony was scheduled for next week. Dr. Martinez had worked with local contractors to design a facility that would serve up to 20 children at a time, with staff quarters and administrative offices. The only stipulation Kellen had insisted on was the name, the Joni Rourke Center for Safe Childhoods. Dad, can I see where our old house was? Kellen turned to find Joni walking carefully across the uneven ground, wearing her favorite purple sneakers and a sundress that was already getting dirty from the construction dust. This is it, he said, gesturing to the empty foundation. This is where Grandma and Grandpa used to live. Joni studied the concrete rectangle with serious interest. It's smaller than I remember. Things often are. What's going to be here instead? A place where kids can stay when they need somewhere safe. Like a hotel. Sort of. But for kids whose families are having problems. Joni nodded gravely. That's good. Kids need safe places. Yes, they do. She walked the perimeter of the foundation, her small hands trailing along the concrete edge. Will the kids who stay here be sad? Probably. But they'll be safe while they figure out how to be happy again. And it'll be grown-ups to help them. Yes. Kind grown-ups who know how to take care of children. Joni seemed satisfied with this explanation. Can we come visit sometimes? To see how the kids are doing? If you want to. I do. I think it would be good to know that sad kids have somewhere to go. That evening, Kellen received a call from Pastor Hodge. I wanted to thank you, the pastor said without preamble. For what? For the donation to Haven House. Dr. Martinez spoke at our board meeting last week. What you're building is going to help a lot of children. That's the point. I also wanted to apologize for pushing you toward forgiveness without understanding the full situation. Kellen was quiet for a moment. You meant well. Good intentions don't excuse poor judgment. I should have listened better. And my parents? How are they? Pastor Hodge sighed. They're staying in a rental trailer outside of town. Calvin found work at the grain elevator. Your mother, she's struggling. This has been hard on her. I'm sure it has. She asks about you. About Joni. What do you tell her? That some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt with words alone. Kellen appreciated the honesty. That's good advice. Is there anything I can do? Any message you'd like me to pass along? No, But Pastor, yes. The next time a family member asks you to intervene in a situation like this, maybe start by asking what the children experienced. Pastor Hodge was quiet for a long moment. I will. Thank you for the lesson. After the call, Kellen found Joni in her bedroom, working on a drawing at her small desk. The picture showed a large building with many windows and a sign that read "Safe Place" in careful block letters. Is that the new building? He asked. Yes. I'm drawing it for the sad kids, so they know what it looks like before they get there. That's very thoughtful. I want them to know it's going to be beautiful. Sometimes when you're sad, you need to know that beautiful things are coming. Kellen studied the drawing more carefully. Joni had included details the architects probably hadn't thought of: flowers in window boxes, a playground visible through one window, stick figures of children and adults holding hands in front of the building. Can I keep this? He asked. Of course. Maybe you can show it to the people who are building the real one. I think they'd like to see it. 3 days later, Kellen met with Dr. Martinez at the construction site. The foundation work had begun, and the basic framework would be completed within 6 weeks. We've had some interesting developments, Dr. Martinez said as they walked around the site. Word about the project has spread, and we're getting calls from other communities wanting similar facilities. That's good. It is. But I wanted to ask you something. We've been approached by a documentary filmmaker who wants to tell the story of how this center came to be. Obviously, we wouldn't proceed without your consent. Kellen considered the request. What kind of story would they tell? The story of how personal tragedy can be transformed into community healing. How one family's difficult decisions led to resources for hundreds of other families. And my family? My parents. They'd be part of the story, but the focus would be on the children this center will serve. We're not interested in exploiting anyone's pain. I'll think about it. Of course. No pressure either way. That night, Kellen discussed the documentary proposal with Joni over dinner. Will we be on TV? She asked. Probably. When I have to talk about Grandma and Grandpa, only if you wanted to. You could talk about the new building instead. Joni considered this while twirling spaghetti on her fork. What would happen if we said yes? Other people might learn about what we're building here. Maybe they'd want to build similar places in their towns. For more sad kids. Then we should do it. Sad kids everywhere need safe places. Kellen called Dr. Martinez the next morning and agreed to participate in the documentary, with conditions about how Joni would be involved and what aspects of their story could be shared. 2 weeks later, the local newspaper ran a front-page story about the center construction. The article mentioned that the project was funded by a private donor with personal ties to the community, but didn't name Kellen specifically. Rena commented on the article's social media post. Interesting how some people can afford to build fancy buildings while elderly family members live in trailers. Someone replied, maybe if the elderly family members hadn't lost their house, they wouldn't need the trailer. Rena didn't respond to that comment. By October, the construction was ahead of schedule. The Joni Rourke Center for Safe Childhoods was taking shape, a warm, inviting building with large windows and outdoor play spaces, designed to feel more like a home than an institution. Kellen drove past the site every few weeks, usually with Joni, both of them watching the progress with quiet satisfaction. The framework was complete, the roof was on, and interior work had begun. It's going to be beautiful, Joni said during one of their visits. The kids are going to feel safe there. I think you're right. Dad, yeah. I'm glad we're building this instead of keeping the old house. Why is that? Because the old house was where sad things happened. But this building is where sad things will get better. Dr. Martinez had provided regular updates on the project's impact beyond construction. 3 other communities had reached out about establishing similar centers. A state legislature committee was discussing expanded funding for childhood trauma services. The documentary was scheduled to air on PBS in the spring. We're calling it the Meadow Ridge Model, Dr. Martinez explained during one of their meetings. Community-based, privately funded, focused on immediate crisis intervention rather than long-term warehousing. And it's working. Even before we open, it's working. Just knowing these resources will be available has changed how local social services approach family crisis situations. That same week, Kellen received an unexpected visitor at his office. Calvin stood in the reception area, hat in his hands, looking older and more weathered than Kellen remembered. "I'd like 5 minutes," Calvin said when Kellen emerged from his office. "If you can spare it." Kellen studied his father's face, the deep lines around his eyes, the gray stubble, the hands that showed months of manual labor. 5 minutes, Kellen agreed. They sat in Kellen's office with the door closed. Calvin looked around at the awards and diplomas on the walls, the view of the lake, the evidence of his son's success. "Your mother's not doing well," Calvin said without preamble. "I'm sorry to hear that. She keeps asking why you did this. Why you let us lose everything. What do you tell her?" "I tell her we lost everything because we couldn't pay for it." Kellen was surprised by the honesty. "That's accurate. Is it?" Calvin's voice carried a challenge. "Or did we lose everything because our son decided to teach us a lesson?" "You lost everything because you spent 39 years teaching me that cruelty was normal. And then you were cruel to my daughter." Calvin was quiet for a moment. "She didn't mean it. Your mother, when she yelled at Joni, she was just stressed. Stress explains behavior. It doesn't excuse it. Everyone makes mistakes. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. And when I left with Joni, not one of you apologized. Not to her, not to me. You were too busy being angry that I wouldn't let you continue." Calvin's jaw tightened. "So, this is permanent? This situation between us? This situation is the result of your choices over decades. If you wanted to change your behavior. How?" The question seemed genuine, which surprised Kellen more than he cared to admit. "Start by apologizing to Joni. She's 6 years old. She probably doesn't even remember. She remembers. And she deserves to hear that what happened to her was wrong." Calvin stood up slowly. "And if we apologize? If we admit we were wrong? Then what? Then you'd be different people than you are. But would we be able to see her again?" Kellen studied his father's face, looking for signs of genuine change or just strategic positioning. "If you became the kind of people who could genuinely apologize for harming a child, we'd have a conversation." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're going to get." Calvin nodded and headed toward the door. "The building you're putting up. The one with her name on it. What about it? It's a good thing. Whatever else happened between us, that's a good thing." After Calvin left, Kellen sat in his office for a long time, staring out at the lake and thinking about the conversation. His father had seemed different, more tired, less angry, possibly more honest than Kellen had ever seen him. But different wasn't the same as changed. And Kellen had learned long ago not to mistake temporary adjustments for genuine transformation. That evening, he told Joni about the visit over dinner. "Grandpa came to see you?" she asked. "Yes." "What did he want?" "To talk about what happened when we visited them." "Did he say sorry?" "No, but he asked what it would take for that to happen." Joni considered this information seriously. "What did you tell him?" "I told him he'd have to apologize to you. For calling me useless. For calling you useless." "Do you think he will?" "I don't know. People can change, but they have to want to. And if he does say sorry, will we visit them again?" Kellen chose his words carefully. "If Grandpa and Grandma became the kind of people who could sincerely apologize for hurting you, then we'd talk about what comes next. But not unless they change. Not unless they change." Joni nodded, satisfied with this conditional arrangement. "That seems fair." 2 weeks later, Dolores called. Kellen let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. "Kellen, it's Mom. I know you probably won't call me back, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I said to Joni, and I'm sorry for everything, really. I know we weren't good parents. I know we hurt you. And I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it anyway. I hope you and Joni are happy. I hope she knows how lucky she is to have you." The message was 2 minutes long, broken by several pauses where Dolores seemed to be crying. Kellen saved the voicemail but didn't return the call. The next day, he received a letter addressed to Joni. It was from Dolores, written in careful handwriting on floral stationery. "Dear Joni," it began, "I'm your grandma Dolores. I'm writing to tell you that I'm very sorry for the mean things I said to you when you visited. You're not useless. You are smart and beautiful and good. I was having a bad day, but that's no excuse for being mean to you. I hope someday you can forgive me. Love, Grandma." Kellen read the letter twice, then showed it to Joni. "She says she's sorry," Joni observed. Yes, she does. Do you think she means it? I think she's trying to mean it. What's the difference? Time will tell. Joni folded the letter carefully and handed it back to Kellen. Can you keep this for me? Until I'm older and can decide what I think about it. Of course. That weekend, they drove past the construction site again. The exterior was nearly complete, and workers were installing the sign that would identify the building, the Joni Rourke Center for Safe Childhoods. There's my name, Joni said with quiet pride. There it is. The sad kids will know my name. Yes, they will. That's good. I want them to know that someone who was sad once helped build their safe place. Kellen looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. You were sad once. When Grandma called me useless. I was sad for a few days, but not anymore. Not anymore. Because you helped me understand it wasn't about me. It was about something broken inside her. That's right. And now something good came from something bad. That's how it works sometimes, right? That's exactly how it works. 1 year later, Kellen and Joni stood in front of the completed Joni Rourke Center for Safe Childhoods, watching children play in the outdoor recreation area. The facility had been open for 3 months and was already operating at capacity. The building was everything Dr. Martinez had envisioned: warm, welcoming, designed to feel safe rather than institutional. Large windows filled the spaces with natural light. Outdoor areas included gardens where children could grow vegetables and flowers. The residential wings were divided into small, home-like pods rather than dormitory-style accommodations. It's perfect, Joni said, watching a group of children about her age playing on the playground equipment. It looks exactly like my drawing. It does. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, approached the fence separating the public sidewalk from the center's grounds. Are you Joni? She asked. Yes. I'm Sarah. I live here right now. Thank you for the building. You're welcome. Do you like it? It's the safest place I've ever been. The simple statement hit Kellen harder than he'd expected. This was why they'd torn down the old house. This was why he'd cut off his parents' mortgage payments. This was why he'd endured months of angry phone calls and social media accusations so that children like Sarah could have somewhere safe to be. Dr. Martinez emerged from the building's main entrance, accompanied by a woman Kellen didn't recognize. Kellen, Joni, Dr. Martinez called out. Perfect timing. I'd like you to meet someone. The woman was in her 40s, with graying hair and kind eyes. She wore jeans and a sweater, casual clothes that suggested she worked directly with the children rather than in administration. This is Linda Chun, our residential director, Dr. Martinez said. Linda, this is Kellen Rourke and his daughter Joni. Linda shook Kellen's hand warmly. Thank you for making this possible. We've been able to help 47 children in just 3 months. How are they doing? Better than we hoped. The home-like environment makes a real difference. Kids feel safe here in a way they might not in a larger institutional setting. And long-term outcomes, too early for comprehensive data, but the initial indicators are very positive. Most children are able to return to family situations within 90 days, with ongoing support services. The ones who can't return home are placed in carefully screened foster families or kinship care arrangements. Joni had been listening to the adult conversation with her usual serious attention. Ms. Chun, yes, sweetheart. Are all the kids here safe now? They are. Every single one of them is safe. Good. That's what we wanted. After Dr. Martinez and Linda Chun returned to the building, Kellen and Joni continued their walk around the perimeter of the property. The center occupied the entire block where his parents' house had once stood, plus the neighboring lot that the city had donated to expand the project. Dad, Joni said as they completed their circuit, why did you put my name on the building? Because you deserve to be remembered for who you are, not for what someone else called you. And because other kids should know that someone who understands sadness helped make their safe place. That too, they walked in comfortable silence for several minutes, heading back toward their car. I got another letter from Grandma last week, Joni said eventually. I know. Do you want to talk about it? She's been writing every month for a year. Yes. And she always says she's sorry. Yes. Do you think she really is sorry? Kellen considered the question carefully. Over the past year, Dolores had written 12 letters to Joni. Each one contained an apology. Each one acknowledged that her behavior had been wrong. The letters had evolved from desperate pleas for forgiveness to quieter expressions of regret and hope for eventual reconciliation. "I think she's learned to be sorry," Kellen said finally. "Is that the same as being sorry?" "I'm not sure yet." "When will you be sure?" "When I see whether being sorry changes how she treats children." Joni nodded, accepting this logic. "Can I decide for myself when I'm older whether to write back to her?" "Of course. Those letters are yours. Your relationship with her will be whatever you decide it should be. Even if I decide I don't want one. Even then, and you won't be mad at me either way. I won't be mad at you either way." As they reached their car, Joni turned back for one more look at the center. The afternoon sun was hitting the windows at just the right angle, making the building seem to glow from within. "It's beautiful," she said. "Yes, it is. Do you remember what the old house looked like?" Kellen tried to summon an image of his childhood home, but found that the memories had faded. The center had occupied the space for such a short time, but it had already replaced his mental picture of what belonged there. "Not really," he admitted. "Me either. I just remember being sad there, and then being safe with you." That's a good way to remember it. As they drove home through the late afternoon traffic, Joni fell asleep in her booster seat. Kellen glanced at her in the rearview mirror, 7 years old now. Confident and secure in ways he'd never been at her age. She would grow up knowing that adults who claimed to love her would be held accountable for how they treated her. She would learn that safety was non-negotiable, that kindness was the minimum standard, that love was demonstrated through actions rather than declared through words. And if she ever found herself in a situation where people who claimed to care about her were causing her harm, she would have the strength to walk away. That evening, after Joni was asleep, Kellen stood on his balcony overlooking Lake Michigan. The city lights reflected off the water like scattered promises, and the summer air carried the distant sound of life continuing in all its messy complexity. His phone buzzed with a text from Luis. "Saw the PBS documentary about the center. You look good on camera." Kellen typed back, "Thanks. Any regrets about going public with the story?" "No. If it helps other communities build similar resources, it was worth it." "And your family? How are they handling the attention?" "They're managing. Still no contact. Dolores writes to Joni every month. Calvin sent a Christmas card. Progress? Maybe. Time will tell. Think you'll ever reconcile?" Kellen looked out at the lake and considered the question. Reconciliation implied a return to a previous state of harmony. But there had never been harmony in his family, only dysfunction that everyone had agreed to pretend was normal. What his parents seemed to want was forgiveness without consequences, restoration without change. What Kellen required was evidence that they'd become different people, capable of different choices. The gap between those positions remained unbridgeable. "I don't think reconciliation is the right word," he typed back. "But if they keep changing, maybe we'll find a new way to relate to each other." "Fair enough. And if they don't change, then Joni and I will keep building good things from the wreckage of bad things." That sounds like wisdom or stubbornness. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. After the conversation ended, Kellen remained on the balcony for another hour. Tomorrow, he would take Joni to her piano lesson, help her with homework, read her a bedtime story. They would live their quiet, predictable life in a space free from the chaos that had defined his childhood. And 47 children would sleep safely in a building that bore his daughter's name, protected by adults who understood that love was a verb, not just a feeling. He didn't feel satisfaction or vindication or closure. He felt something simpler and more sustainable. The calm that comes from aligning your actions with your values, regardless of how other people respond. Kellen hadn't destroyed a family. He dismantled a lie and built something true in its place. The difference was everything.